Hey folks! As I promised to someone in the last months, I finally decided to start covering some JRPGs, and why not starting from the very first I played? I would like to point out that the version I played is the NTSC for PS1 emulated on DuckStation. Originally I tried the classic PC port, but the MIDI music was terrible and the on-screen controls hardly comprehensible. So I took a look at the remastered and... nope. For this reason, I wanted to keep it short and opted to stick with the original version and messed with the graphic options until I found the right compromise. Besides, I think I'll survive even without playing Chocobo World, which was available on PC. My first contact with Final Fantasy VIII was while I was leafing through a magazine in 2003 with a friend, and a page contained a screen of the game, which was soon described to me and sounded very interesting. Then time passed. It was June 19th of that year, and I convinced my father to get me the PlayStation that everyone had except me, a PC gamer to the core, around 9 in the morning. Together with the console, I bought that Final Fantasy VIII which aroused my curiosity. And well, it was a kind of new beginning for me as a gamer, because I was about to discover a genre that would have become my favorite for many years to come. The first time I booted and started this game has been a freaking blast. Before playing it, I already had solid narrative experiences like Deus Ex and Gothic, but this game was special. Something very different that felt epic and unique. Just look at the legendary intro. It's still a masterpiece. The music, the imagery, the perfect sync between the action and the song Liberi Fatali, it's all incredible. Even my father watched it and said, "Damn, this stuff is epic." I was just 13 and the first playthrough of this adventure was memorable. This epic intro builds up a mystery and foreshadows different things like the rivalry between these two men, possible villains, and a future romance. And here the introduction ends, and we'll soon get to know the protagonist of the game, Squall Leonheart. An introverted, tough guy that awakens in the infirmary after the bloody conclusion of the sparring section against his rival Cypher, in which they scarred each other and then is recovered by his instructor, which is another member of the main cast, this blondie called Quistis. Final Fantasy VIII does a great job of introducing its setting and characters, alongside core mechanics like its signature character development system strictly related to the game's lore and main story. Squall is a student resident in the Balamb Garden, a kind of military academy in which youngsters study and train to become Seeds, a sort of mercenary force for hire deployed around the world in special missions for governments and civilians, and right at the start of the game, Squall is about to take the exam to become a Seed. Balamb Garden's cadets are trained in exploiting the powers granted by the Guardian Forces, in short GFs, sort of deities to which regular humans can connect via junction system. We'll have to acquire the two first GFs from the computer terminal or from Quisters herself at the Garden's gate, from which she will assist Squall in a test before taking the exam. Junction system is very original, though a bit complicated and not very well explained, and permits a high customization of the characters, taking into account the abilities learned by the Guardian Forces. First of all, GFs permit to increase a character's attributes by binding stocked magics assimilated from enemies or by drawing points via the draw command. The basic idea is not bad, but then will be limited in the use of binded spells because this causes a decrease of the attribute associated with it. This is a very silly design choice, and for this reason, in this run I never used the magic command in battle except near the end of the game and preferred the consumable items, the standard attacks, the character's overpowered limit breaks, and summoning the Guardian Forces. GFs are actually summonable creatures which will mostly cause elemental damage and will be kinda abused for maybe the first half of the game. The cool thing about it is that the summon will require a bit of time to be executed, depending from the compatibility between the junctioned character and the beast. And during the process, the GF will take damage and can be even knocked out, becoming unusable. The first time I saw a summoning animation, I was amazed. I didn't care for the length, and then I also discovered the boost ability, which permits to increase the GF's attack power by pressing the square button like crazy when it's permitted. In case of error, it returns to the minimum. There are in total 16 Guardian Forces. The third, Ifrit, will be acquired at the end of the test alongside the Quistis in the Fire Cavern, and it's also the first boss. All the next ones can be obtained from bosses, using the draw ability or other ways like special challenges in certain dungeons. The completion of the test in the Fire Cavern is just the beginning of the adventure. Things will start to get more serious and will be introduced to new characters, like Zell, the school guy with the Mike Tyson tattoo. He's actually an idiot. And teaming up with Cypher, with whom Squall gets along well, even though they nearly killed each other some hours earlier. That's the beginning of a great bromance. Or not. The mission in Dollet is one of the best parts of the game. The devs here really nailed it with the quality of MVVs. Just watch the landing. The militaristic approach is very emphasized here, and it always makes me laugh that as an exam, young people are sent to a real battlefield where they can seriously die. Well, aside that, the entire part is quite enjoyable, though the behaviors of its characters and their interactions become a little cringy, and Cypher starts acting like a bloodthirsty idiot and leads an assault to a communication tower where he goes on a rampage, and Squall and Zell are then reached by the new member of the main cast, Selfie. The mission in Dollet continues with outstanding sequences like this FMV. And then the battle with these two recurring twerps followed by the real boss, from which we can draw the fourth GF called the Siren. And the spectacle is still not finished. There's then this deadly pursuit by the mechanical spider, that is a special boss which can be simply knocked out in order to flee from it multiple times, until Squall and company reach the beach where Quistis will gun it down for good. That was awesome. The beginning of this game is a banger, and then Squall, Zell, Selfie, and this dude get promoted to Seed while Cypher, well, acts like a gentleman is the first to applaud, even though he failed the exam. So far, Final Fantasy VIII is an enjoyable experience with a blasting prologue, which ends with the graduation ceremony, in which we can admire the iconic dancing scene between Squall and the mysterious girl that approaches him in the first place. After that, the story goes into serious business, as Squall is the final Seed and will be sending missions for the Garden. There's indeed a lot of potential, and world building featuring the belligerent nation of Galbadia and resistance movements which opposes it. At the center of everything, by the way, there's the growth of Squall from an introverted edgelord to a mature and open person. I mean, the behaviors of this guy are freaking cartoonish. He's just immersed in deep thoughts and acts cold with everyone. He doesn't even shake hands. Anyway, from now on the story will take some unexpected twists and will also deal with some serious themes later on, but it will not just focalize on Squall and his squad, because during the journey to Timber we'll be introduced to another group of heroes. Suddenly, we'll get to know Laguna and his two pals, Gyros and Ward. Laguna's adventures are, let's say, interesting, and narrate events set in a sort of past that will intersect with the main story, and will have a certain weight later on. These parallel stories are not a bad idea, they actually enrich the main plot, but they have this problem of not taking themselves much seriously, and are full of embarrassing comic skits with just a hint of seriousness here and there, in total contrast with Squall's main storyline, which has a constant cold and serious tone. See, Laguna and his companions are true friends who have known each other for a long time, while Squall, Zell, Self and the others have yet to get to know each other well. And one of the most memorable things of these dreamlike segments is the different battle theme. Just listen, it's a banger. Final Fantasy VIII's biggest problems is that it seems to take itself seriously, but then the writing of its characters and their reactions to ongoing events and each other just pisses me off. Once arrived in Timber, the Seeds group is tasked to assist a group of rebels led by the mysterious girl from the ball and the intro, Rinoa Hartley, which is Squall's future love interest. This Wagons exchange mission is actually very cool. There's the time limit, codes to type carefully before being discovered by guards, and so on, though it doesn't end as planned. Because of this, the group of rebels will act as a bunch of disorganized idiots who come up with plans fought on the spot, and later will move on the streets of Timber to continue the mission, and there will be some political twists and the return on scene of Quistis and Cypher, who will create a mess while the mysterious figure of the Sorceress literally emerges from darkness. We'll begin to know the true antagonists of the story, and later Irvine joins the group. Is the school-acting gunslinger that will have a key role in the next assignment in Dealing City, in which the Seeds are tasked to assassinate the Sorceress. But, for fuck's sake, in this part I saw the peak of bad writing of this game, where people leave their place in a crucial moment for stupid reasons, and the freaking sniper can shoot because the pressure is too much. Faccio Irvine. Luckily, the quality of the FMVs is always over the top and helps keep the interest high. And Cypher becomes the Knight of the Sorceress. Is actually a romantic individual living the dream. Now, describe the story without huge spoilers is very difficult, because really a lot of things will happen, and we'll get to know more closely Squall, his past and his relationship with his companions. There will be a plot twist which is kinda foreshadowed that involves the whole cast, but it's a bit sudden and leaves more perplexed than amazed. The love story between Squall and Rinoa will take over almost everything, and well, it's not as terrible as I remembered, but let's say that there is an exaggerated escalation of attachment on Squall's side at a certain point, which seems slightly forced and out of character. After all, one of the game's central themes is that love overcomes everything. Due to this, most of the protagonists do not have a particular development and are mostly functional to the story, which is not necessarily a problem, because in the end there's a certain group alchemy, and we sympathize with some, and the rivalry between Squall and Cypher remains alive until the end. However, during this last playthrough, I felt that the game had a somewhat rushed development, because some parts of the plot seemed done quickly without much explanation, but the spectacle remains always elevated thanks to the beautiful cutscenes, and the ending part is not bad, though maybe the final villain may not seem that memorable, but the last dungeon is very well crafted, and the final battle is thrilling, followed by a long and trippy closing sequence that I was pleased to see again. I would like to summarize that the overall story of Final Fantasy VIII is full of potential indeed. It has a blasting beginning and an interesting setting, but then it suffers from juvenile writing and some questions that I don't find particularly well resolved, to which are added other defects such as a cast that isn't always brilliant and a protagonist with whom I hardly sympathize. I mean, I didn't really like him even as a teenager. And this was my personal overview of the story. Let's now deepen this game's particular mechanics. The junction system, as I said before, permits to increase the character stats by binding stock magics, depending from the abilities learned by the Guardian Forces thanks to the ability points acquired at the end of battles. But there's more. We can actually apply elemental damage to the attacks and elemental defenses. At a certain point, we can even absorb elemental attacks, and the same can be made for status changes, which we can inflict and increase defenses until become even immune. Practically, the junction system totally replaces the need of equipping armors or accessories, which are absent. The weapons, however, are present, but, let's say, must be first be discovered by reading scattered issues of the dedicated magazine, and then assembled in specialized shops, using objects that can almost always be obtained from enemies. They are quite few for each character, and in the case of Squall, they unlock new special attacks for his limit break. We must always check every boss for dronable Guardian Forces, and check dungeons. In the Tomb of the Unknown King, we can fight and obtain the Brothers after resolving some puzzles, and in the Central Ruins we'll find Odin and Tomberry. Odin is a special boss to beat within the time limit, and then will appear randomly at the start of battles and will kill immediately all enemies, though he's not a junctionable GF. Tomberry instead will show up after killing many of his similars, and possesses interesting abilities. Junction system may seem difficult to master, yes, but it's incredibly fucking broken. See, GFs can learn refining abilities accessible from the menu. From the start of the game, we can easily refine some powerful spells like Curaga from the object tent, which will largely boost HPs. Another important ability is refining the cards. See, Final Fantasy VIII features an interesting minigame based on playable cards depicting common monsters, bosses, GFs, and main characters. Some will be found in abundance and others are rare and obtainable only once from specific NPCs. Triple Triad is one hell of a minigame, even for me as I'm not much into these things in games. By the way, cards can be refined in objects, which can be transformed in overpowered spells that will help increasing dramatically the attributes early on. It's just ludicrous, believe me. And another interesting feature of the game is that enemies level up with the party. In short, the majority of monsters from random encounters, except in certain areas which are fixed, and all the bosses are scaled with the average level of the active party. In fact, to level up are necessary always 1000 experience points, and bosses give only the ability points for the GF's abilities. So leveling up makes fights harder and changes the obtainable items and dronable magics from enemies. Besides, the increment of stats is even scarce, because the whole game is designed with junction system in mind. This means we can finish the game with a very low level party that will have instead incredibly high attributes thanks to junctioning, and the GF Diablos can learn early the ability Encounter None, which removes all random battles. By the way, I reached the level 100 way before the endgame, but I steamrolled some bosses using just standard attacks, because they also have level caps and just a few reach the maximum level. The limit breaks alongside the summoning of the Guardian Forces are the most abused special ability of the game. Unlike the summonings that I find useful especially during the first stages, the limit breaks will be vital from the start to finish, because they deal the highest amount of damage necessary to defeat the toughest bosses and enemies. Limit breaks activate when the character's HPs are low or under the effect of the magic aura, and are unique for each of them. The most famous and used is Squall's Renzokuken, in which he will strike up to 7 times. Against some bosses he will execute special animated combos, and randomly, at the end he will also perform a finishing move that can be Rough Divide or the exaggerated and overpowered Leonheart, unlockable by assembling his final weapon. Zell instead performs fighting moves within a time limit by pressing the shot buttons, and with practice we can perform the same 2 consecutive attacks, taking just tenths of a second and deal in total tons of damage. Irvine is my third favorite, because he fires special ammo that can be those super fast but not much damaging, or others extremely powerful before the time finishes, and the best bullets can be crafted early on from items thanks to a GF's ability. The last funny thing I must describe is the way how money is earned. Seeds are paid mercenaries by the Garden, and in fact will receive a salary on regular intervals. The game takes into account specified actions during the story that will affect the seed rank, which can decrease or increase, and the initial rank will be determined at the end of the seed exam. From then we can increase it by solving tests accessible from the menu, featuring questions based on the game's mechanics. That said, defeated enemies don't give money, but still we can sell items at vendors, and obviously there are methods to obtain tons of gills thanks to the GF's abilities. In summary, Final Fantasy VIII's gameplay as a whole is indeed intriguing and unique for some aspects. There are many cool ideas, but then problems like the odd usage of stock magics, which discourages the use of them in battles, followed by the many exploit and abuse of summons and limit breaks, just makes me think that the authors didn't have much of an idea on how to balance everything, and it gives me also the feeling of a half-wasted opportunity. However, I appreciate how they dared to do something original, and I definitely played worse and more banal games. Now, graphically this game is still very enjoyable. When it came out, it certainly left a lot of people speechless, and not only for the magnificent FMVs. If we analyze it, Final Fantasy VIII featured realistically convincing looking characters and environments. Tetsuya Nomura's character design is quite pleasant in my opinion, maybe one of his best, because I also find it quite sober and more likable for the majority of people. The characters' models, but also those of the many fightable enemies, I think are very well rendered and animated. The first time I played it, in 2003, I couldn't believe that PlayStation games could be so great in terms of graphics. My jaw dropped the first time I saw the summons, and all the other visual effects. And talking about music, well, every detractor of this game has never dared to criticize Nobuo Uematsu's work, which they even come to consider the only great thing in the game. There are many great pieces, such as the iconic intro Liberi Fatali, then relaxing ambient themes, and some noteworthy battle themes such as Force Your Way or the last phase of the last battle called The Extreme. I also appreciate the theme song Eyes on Me, it's very catchy. However, well, forgive me, there are other soundtracks of his that I love more. To conclude, Final Fantasy VIII is a classic from a great era, which has gone down in history as a very divisive chapter among the fans of the series. In my opinion, it suffered from a somewhat rushed development, which caused some problems as plot points which are not well developed. This game is not as terrible as many detractors make it out to be. It has its flaws, but also merits. It's not the genre-defining game which was instead its predecessor, and frankly speaking, it wouldn't even be in the top 10 of the best JRPGs I've played, but it remains for me the classic that opened the doors to a new genre, and it's certainly still worth of a try. Replaying it and reviewing it has been very nice, and that said, a warm thanks to all viewers, and see you in the next entry.